All will be noted.
Thank you. Will you please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, jumping right into item 2A, minutes of the regular city council meeting on July 23rd, 2024. I would entertain a motion to approve those minutes. Do I have a second? Motion and a second. All those in favor say aye. Any opposed? Motion
I should
carries.
probably abstain.
2 abstentions. All right.
Thank you.
So the minutes are still approved. All right, thank you. 2B, minutes of the city council work session on July 23rd, 2024. I would entertain a motion to approve those minutes.
So approved.
I have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? 1 abstention. Very good. Motion carries. The minutes are approved. Adoption of the agenda. We have a couple amendments. I'll just note for item 4E, we have a replacement resolution that updates condition 3. That was given to you at the dais here. And then we're going to pull item 4M, resolution adopting a fair housing policy, which will become new item 8B. And unless there are any other changes, I'd entertain a motion to adopt the agenda. I have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We have an agenda. Item 4, consent agenda. I'd entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda as amended.
Second.
A motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. The consent agenda is approved. Item 5, visitors and presentations. Nothing scheduled. Item 6A, vacation of sections of easement located at 12th Street and Bloom Ave and White Bear Lake Schools additional preliminary and final plats. Mr. Lindahl, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. So again, the item that that we're looking at tonight is the preliminary and final plat for the North Campus site, along with vacations of sections of right-of-way that were found as cleanup items associated with that plat. The subject property, as I think everyone is probably aware, is located between Division and Bald Eagle, just south of the railroad tracks of the city's corporate limits, and is currently zoned public. The applicant is White Bear Public Schools. As we noted, this is a preliminary and final plat. It consolidates a number of properties that the school owned and then several that were acquired throughout the expansion process into one plat with 2 lots. So far, for community comment, we've had 1 call just asking about clarification to the procedures of what we were talking about and what was actually occurring. And the Planning Commission held the public hearing for the preliminary and final plat sections of this item tonight with 1 question from the public about sidewalk maintenance related to the site. As I mentioned, as in a related item tonight now is the vacations of the portions of the 12th Street and Bloom Avenue right-of-way vacations or easement vacations. The Planning Commission reviewed this item at their last meeting and along with staff is recommending approval. So again, there's just a couple of quick background items as part of the 2019 referendum item. The school district has completed or is in the process of completing a number of expansions throughout their properties in White Bear Lake. The one tonight that we're focusing on is the North Campus site. As part of the improvements to that site, the district acquired a number of properties and had several properties of their own, and so this plat consolidates all of those properties. In 2021, the school district was granted their original conditional use permit for the overall project. And one of the conditions of that original approval was that they complete this property consolidation process. And so they're completing that original process. You may also remember that on a related item is that there was an amendment to that original 2021 approval in 2023 that was related to expansion of the stadium to accommodate football. The campus is, as I think, again, most people know, anticipated to open this year and include grades 9 through 12. So as I mentioned, the planning process consolidates all of the properties acquired during the expansion process. into 2 lots. Lot 1, or the northern lot, contains predominantly the high school property itself. Lot 2, the southern property, is Central Middle School and its surrounding properties. And again, we're looking at this as a housekeeping item, fulfilling one of the conditions of approval of their original conditional use permit in 2021. So there are 6 general findings that we look at in reviewing a preliminary and final plat, and there's more detail in your staff report about these, but staff finds both the preliminary and final plat consistent with all of these findings. To look at specifically at the vacation portion of what we're talking about tonight, again, during the platting preparation process, it was discovered a couple of these easements were no longer necessary. And so the one for 12th Street actually runs through the kind of the northern third or so quarter of the property and actually under the building and is no longer necessary. And so as a cleanup item, vacating this is appropriate. The second one is a portion of Bloom Avenue just north of 8th Street. With the school district acquiring properties on the neighboring block, this portion of Bloom will now function basically as their portion of their driveway, their private driveway. So again, it doesn't have a public purpose anymore and is appropriate to vacate it. So with that, also the city needs to find, in this case, that the easements no longer serve a public purpose and are no longer needed. And so vacation of these easements is in the public interest at this time. So with that, staff is recommending approval of the vacations of the public easements that for the sections of 12th Street and Bloom Avenue that we just spoke about, and approval of the preliminary and final plats. For the vacation portion of this item, the council does need to hold a public hearing as part of that, and that's been noticed properly and set up for tonight. And I would just note that the vacation item requires a 4/5 vote for approval. So with that, I'd take questions.
Thank you, Mr. Lindell. Well, let's jump right into the public hearing for the vacation of sections of easements located at 12th Street and Bloom. I have nobody on my sign-up sheet, but if anybody would like to speak to that, I'm opening up the public hearing now. Seeing none, we're going to close the public hearing, bring it back to the council. Council, do we have questions for Mr. Lindell, or would someone like to move approval of one of 2 of the resolutions? No questions?
It seems pretty straightforward. I don't think we need a street going through the school anymore. I'm pretty sure that school's going to last a long time, and I can't imagine, although parking maybe, but no. So, sure, I'll move approval of the, are there 2 resolutions?
So I'd entertain a motion to approve the resolution granting preliminary and final plat approvals for White Bear Lake Area School additions.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion on that? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That resolution passes. The second resolution we have, which I would entertain a motion to approve, is the resolution vacating certain public easements within the city of White Bear Lake.
So moved.
I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion on that? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. That resolution passes as well. All right, thank you. All right, item 6B, second reading of an ordinance amending the operation of cannabis business interim moratorium ordinance. Mr. Anderson, if you'd like to
Sure.
illuminate us on that, that'd be great.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. So we're here tonight for a second reading for a relatively straightforward amendment to the cannabis moratorium that was approved by Council last year. This was recommended mostly due to the fact that the legislature made some changes in this past session to the Cannabis Act, making and providing an opportunity for businesses to get license pre-approvals, potentially begin some cultivation activities early prior to licensure. And they also modified the definition of the term cannabis business, which, again, requires some clarification just so there's no confusion from business owners thinking that they may be able to operate in the city prior to the adoption of permanent zoning regulations. And so, again, just to make that clear, make that statement to those business owners that we do have a moratorium and there's no ability for cannabis businesses to begin operating in White Bear until that all happens. We are recommending this really as belt and suspenders. So again, typically we would have a public hearing at first reading. Due to timing, sequencing, we tonight teed that up for council to happen at the second reading. So you do have to hold a public hearing. I'm happy to answer any questions after the public hearing. There is both an ordinance and a summary resolution that would allow staff to publish just a short summary of the ordinance that's a couple pages long, so.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Anderson. At this time, I will open up the public hearing for the second reading of an ordinance amending the operation of cannabis businesses interim moratorium ordinance. I have nobody on my sign-up sheet, but if anybody would like to speak to this issue, they can do so now. Seeing none, I will close the public hearing and bring it back to the council. This is just a straightforward housekeeping matter, so if people have questions, by all means ask. Otherwise, I'd entertain a motion to adopt the ordinance first. Do I have a second? Second. Any further discussion on this? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. The ordinance is adopted. We have an accompanying resolution authorizing summary publication. I'd entertain a motion to approve that resolution. I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion on that resolution? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. The resolution is approved. Very good. Councilmember Edberg.
Thank you, Mayor. So it doesn't have to be now. At some point, I'd be curious, are we prepared with our preparations for the work that happens after the state does its thing? And do we anticipate delays? Are we anticipating being in a position to allow businesses to operate legally under the new statute, et cetera? If you have a response now, happy. But if not, I'm just kind of curious what happens in the next few months.
Sure. Mayor, Councilmember Edberg, I will start. I may punt a little bit to Mr. Lindahl, or we can follow up later as well. We do need to adopt a zoning ordinance regarding cannabis businesses, and so we have been waiting for guidance from the state on that, and we do, I think, have that, or mostly have that now after a good clarification webinar last week from the new Office of Cannabis Management. So staff is prepared to be working on that and taking that to Mr. Lindahl. Is that the September Planning Commission first?
Yes, for initial discussion, basically.
Yep. And then that would require 2 readings prior to adoption by the City Council. Our moratorium will expire at the end of this year, as every other communities will. We will no longer have the authority to issue permits to the low potency hemp product carriers, and we will not be licensing cannabis businesses. That we are not allowed to do that. We strictly have a zoning, I guess, somewhat of a say in the zoning side of it, and that's it. So we are have been watching very closely and are prepared to bring that back this fall before January 1, 25.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, item 7, unfinished business. We have nothing scheduled. Item 8A, under new business, a first reading of an ordinance amending the zoning code as it relates to off-sale liquor. Mr. Lindahl.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, as you mentioned, this is the first reading of an ordinance amendment that would address off-sale liquor uses in the downtown central business district. The applicant in this case is in the audience in case the council has questions, but Mr. Patel is the owner of the Catronio's Liquor Store at 2140 3rd Street. And again, we're proposing an amendment to the B5 Central Business Districts to allow off-sale liquor. In what we're going to be presenting to you is a couple of options that different ways to do this as either a permitted or conditional use, and we'll get into those in just a minute here. We did have, from a public comment perspective, we did have 2 emails generally supporting the request that are included in your packet. And also, the Planning Commission heard a public hearing on this item with one speaker in support and one opposed to the request. As I mentioned, the Planning Commission reviewed this item and held a public hearing at their last meeting, and both Planning Commission and staff are recommending approval of one of the three particular options that we'll talk about here in a second. So the options that staff presented to the Planning Commission are these three options. Option one being a permitted use, which would treat off-sale liquors just like any other permitted use within the downtown zoning district. So similar to retail or a restaurant kind of use, they would be allowed throughout the district, and the approval process would be an administrative building permit, basically, for any improvements that you needed to make to a site to get then a certificate of occupancy for that particular property. The second option is a permitted use with some related conditions, specifically geographic ones that would limit the locations of where they could go within the downtown. That would also be an administrative process subject to approval by staff. The third option carries similar conditions to option two, but would make it a conditional use permit that, instead of being an administrative process, would take it through the Planning Commission and City Council for approval. In this case, staff and the Planning Commission are recommending that these uses be allowed as a permitted use with some conditions. Those three conditions are that the property is located, that off-sale liquor would be located on properties located along Highway 61 and along 3rd and 4th Streets, and parcels no larger than 0.2 of an acre. And under those criteria, that limits the site to, and I'm sorry, my square is off a little bit there, but limits it to the one site that the applicant is interested in, which is the former Fraser Auto site, just across the street from his current location. Staff came up with this recommendation really to try and work with the applicant on their timeline, because they are not able to renew their lease in their current location, so they're under a little bit of a timeline issue. And that it really preserves kind of the status quo in downtown related, in this zoning district related to this use. And it also was suggested that we are suggesting this as a course of action because the zoning update process is currently ongoing. And so in the context of the overall zoning update, we'll be looking at all sorts of uses in each different district and where the districts go. And so there would be a chance for a more detailed conversation about opening up kind of beyond what the current status quo is within the downtown district. So we think this recommendation accomplishes all three of those goals. So your staff report goes into detail about 6 criteria that are used to review both zoning text amendments and, in this case, a conditional use permit. So the staff report reviews the application under both items because, in anticipation of the possibility that the city council could select the conditional use permit item, the applicant applied for that, and we've processed that concurrently. But staff's recommendation is, again, a permitted use with conditions. And so more detail about that in your staff report. Happy to answer questions if you have them. But at this case, basically what this comes down to is staff recommends conducting the first reading of the ordinance amendment to the zoning code to allow off-sale liquor as a permitted use in the downtown central business district with the conditions that I've mentioned, and that you direct staff to bring this item back on August 27th for a second reading and action. And with that, I take questions.
So just to clarify, as a matter of process, you're looking for feedback tonight on which way the council's kind of leaning with option 1, 2, or 3?
Correct.
Okay, all right. Well, I'll just make my comments brief. I support staff's recommendation. The option 2 makes good sense to me for some of the reasons that you mentioned, and I don't really have a whole lot more to say on it. Council, do we have questions for Mr. Lindahl? Councilmember Edberg.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Lindahl, my understanding of our current situation in the district under discussion is that we prohibit off-sale liquor sales right now, but we have grandfathered in as a pre-existing location, the Catronio's liquor store. Am I correct in understanding that?
Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Egbert, yes, you are correct.
And when I first began reading the packet and thinking of the options, essentially we have by law created a mini monopoly and given a preferred advantage to the owner of a business by being the only permitted liquor store for off-sale sales in that area. Now it's not a massive monopoly, if you will. It is in a narrow sense, but in a bigger sense, it's not. We can go across 61. You can go a number of other places. But as a general rule, I'm not a big fan of monopoly. I think that's bad policy, especially when it's enforced by public law. And so I'm not all that inclined when I see the conditions that essentially limit it to one location in the absence of some other kind of massive buyout or some other major acquisition. It troubles me that we are limiting it to one entity again and using the force of law to perpetuate a business advantage. And that just strikes me as wrong. So that is an issue that I'm pondering. I admit I won't admit, I will agree that it perpetuates the status quo, but I'm not a big fan of that status quo limitation as it is. So those would be my concerns that I'm going to voice now. I'll do more thinking, and clearly we'll have some more conversation. But I am more inclined that if we are, I'm not opposed to Catronio's moving across the street. I'm not opposed to supporting a local business trying to continue in business. They're losing their location, their current lease. Let's do what we can to support them. But I'm not interested in doing it in a way that perpetuates monopoly. So those are my concerns.
Just to dovetail off of that, a question for Mr. Lindahl. Is it true that when we do the kind of the full zoning revamp that we can address some of Councilmember Edberg's concerns independent of whatever action we take? In other words, we can kind of alleviate some of those concerns in the broader zoning restructuring. Do I have that correct, or am I wrong?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, you're correct.
Because I think those are good points. I think, in principle, I agree with you. I guess I see this as a narrow situation that we can address those very valid concerns literally next month, or starting the process literally next month. So, anyways, just wanted to share those comments. Councilmember Walsh.
Just on that same issue, when I read the memo, I was surprised that we didn't allow, it was not a non-conforming use to sell off-sale liquor, and I haven't thought about it. So, there's only one and it's grandfathered in. Can you speak to the history of that, do you think? I mean, is it unique to White Bear Lake, or is it downtowns don't normally do that, we allow on sale but not off sale? Any idea on the history?
Mayor, members of the council, so I can't give you specific history about the Catronio's site other than to say that before it was Catronio's, it was another liquor store.
I mean, the history of the ordinance, or the history of the zoning decision to not have, because they were grandfathered in, even Cerisi's was grandfathered in at some point. I'm sorry to interrupt, but just the history generally of, is there a reason, is there a public purpose to not have off sale in a downtown like ours?
Yeah, members of the council, so again, it would appear that without any specific history to look back on when the last changes in the late 70s were made to the overall zoning update, there doesn't seem to be a specific reason listed as part of that process. One way to look at it is if you were looking at downtown as more destination kind of related issues, and looking back at Minnesota's history about how we've kind of treated and regulated liquor over the time, 30 to 40 years ago, the council may have decided that they wanted to limit this particular use in downtown, but I don't have, I can't point to minutes that state that. I'm only giving you my kind of what could have been the reason. If you look at liquor stores in general, they tend to be more transient in the kind of user that they have. You tend to come
Parking
there, make your
lot.
purchase,
Yep.
and leave quickly. And if we were looking to promote more uses that promote more people coming downtown for longer periods of time, then it may be a use that you want to limit in some fashion. I think that, that staff really, again, tried to work within the status quo situation, to try and work with the current business owner, and then also, while also trying to honor the zoning update process that both you, Councilmember Walsh, and Councilmember Edberg are part of, and certainly we will talk about this and other uses for downtown as we go forward, so.
Yeah, and just for the record, I support the staff recommendation on so.
Any other questions? Does anybody have, just so we can give staff some instruction with what to come back with, does anybody have strong opinions against what staff's recommendation is, assuming you're inclined to approve the permitted use? Okay. Very good. We've had a reading, and I think you've got feedback. Councilmember Edwards.
Well, I'm just saying, I'm not in favor of the
Sure.
recommendation.
Fair enough. Okay. All right, we've had our first reading, and I think you have what you need to bring back what we need for a second reading. Thank you very much. Item 8B, fair housing policy. Mr. Lindahl, you have that one as well.
Thank you, members of the council. I'm going to turn it over to Tracy for this.
Okay.
Hello, Mayor, members of council. I'm here tonight to discuss the adoption of a fair housing policy. To give a little bit of background, as you most likely recall, we've had a couple of work sessions to discuss this policy. We brought it forth at this time due to the fact that we've worked with Element Design Build to secure some funding to help clean up and redevelop the site at 2502 County Road E, commonly known as the Petro Wash site. As a requirement of one of the grants that they were awarded, the Metropolitan Council TBRA, or Tax-Based Revitalization Account grant, we would be required to have a fair housing policy adopted in order to accept any funds from that grant award. Additionally, we had as a goal in our 2040 comprehensive plan in the housing chapter, a goal of adopting a fair housing policy by 2025, so this puts us a little bit ahead of the schedule. And it's just generally a good policy to have. It doesn't particularly change the workload of city staff. It's things that we commonly do anyway in the course of daily work, but it does provide clear advice or clear communication to our residents about how they may deal with fair housing issues. Next slide. So at the first work session, we brought forth a draft policy. It was largely based on policies that have been adopted by other communities, which were based on a templated policy that was provided by the Metropolitan Council. After feedback from council, there were some concerns about the language in the policy as well as the scope of work that would be laid out in that policy. So staff went back, and after receiving some counsel from our city attorney as well as looking for other plans, redrafted the policy and brought that to the last work session where council seemed generally supportive of what was brought forth. In the grant agreement with the Metropolitan Council, they list out the minimum requirements for a fair housing policy that meets the standards required to get the grant funding. In those, we're required to have a purpose statement, procedures for complaint identification and referral, designate a fair housing fair housing officer and an outline of internal and external actions to advance fair housing. I'm going to walk you through those here as they're laid out in the policy that is in your packet. Our purpose statement affirms the city's commitment to fair housing, as well as laying out the general content of the policy. Next one. We also lay out how we will accept complaints and how we will collect that information, as well as designating the fair housing officer as the community development director or his or her designee. The internal practices we've laid out and recommended in the policy are periodic housing analysis, periodic ordinance and policy review, planning and development analysis of housing developments, and affirmatively furthering fair housing, which is a requirement of other funding received through federal sources related to housing. These are all practices, as you can see, that we've traditionally engaged in as part of our various planning processes, so it's not outside the scope of what we would be doing anyway. And the external practices that we've outlined, again, the designation of the fair housing policy, how we will intake fair housing complaints, how we will communicate with the public fair housing information, which we'll put on the city website, and we'll also have the fair housing information available in person at City Hall should someone choose to receive the information in that way. With that summary, staff would recommend that council adopt the resolution in the packet adopting the fair housing policy. And with that, I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Schimmick. Well, Councilmember West, I'll put you on the spot to start because you wanted to pull this. If you have some thoughts on this, please do share them.
Appreciate that. Thank you, Mayor. I really just wanted to make sure that the community members who were interested in this were able to hear and clearly understand what the policy is that we're putting in place. And also just wanted to reiterate how important a fair housing policy is for us and for our city. I think not only is it in our plan, but part of our plan is to be warm and welcoming, and that really, you know, goes a long way to being warm and welcoming, is to be fair with housing policy. So, thank you. I support this.
Thank you. Just a couple of quick comments. First, I want to compliment staff because you rightfully so brought us a template policy that every other city has adopted. And I was as vocal as anybody in my opposition to it going well beyond what I thought a fair housing policy should be. And to your credit, you brought back, I think, a very simple, clean, fair housing policy that quite frankly says we're going to agree to abide by state and federal law, which we would do anyways, which we should do, which is good, and then adds a couple little internal practices and safeguards to help our residents that might be seeking this information. And that I think ultimately is a good thing. So again, thank you for listening to the policymakers and what our concerns were and bringing back a document that I think is great and I'll support tonight. So thank you. Any other thoughts or comments on this? All right, well, it's, what do we have? It's a resolution approving the fair housing policy. So with that, I would entertain a motion to approve the resolution.
So moved.
I have a motion. Do I have a second? I have a motion, a second. Any further discussion on this? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. The fair housing policy is adopted. Thank you again. Item 9, discussion, nothing scheduled. Item 10, communications from the city manager. Ms. Crawford, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. We have a big event coming up next week. Next Thursday, August 22nd, is our public safety open house, ribbon cutting and open house. So from 5 to 7 p.m. Next door at the newly renovated and expanded police and fire station, inviting all of the public to come, as well as to check out this week's edition of the White Bear Press. They put together, in conjunction with staff, a nice pull-out section of the facility. So thank you to the press for that, and everyone should go check that out and come to the event. So it's probably one of the only times maybe you'll get to see the inside of the police station for a good reason. So
Right.
please come. I think I have a couple more things. We have the very last Fridays with firefighters this Friday, just of the summer. So this Friday from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. at the South Fire Station. And the Historical Society has a program coming up on Monday, August 26th. It's related to the homes of the White Bear Lake Fire Department. I plan on attending. I think it sounds really interesting. I'll probably learn quite a bit. So from 6 to 7 p.m. at the library, Monday, August 26th. That's free to the public. And then lastly, our police squads have been rebranded. So the rebranding is done. I don't have a picture up here. I should have done that. But so you will see now new squads. Well, they're actually not, all of them aren't new. They look new, but they're just, they look a little different, a little updated. And staff made a fun video on social media kind of introducing that, but they are now all done and out on the street. So with that, that's what I have for tonight. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Ms. Crawford. Questions for our city manager? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Motion is second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. We're adjourned.